The coffee in Attorney Wallace's waiting room always tasted burned, but that morning I drank it anyway because it gave my hands something to do besides shake. The printer hummed behind the receptionist, spitting out legal forms, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look a little paler than in real life. I was sitting in one of those low blue chairs, my purse at my feet, my 68-year-old knees complaining quietly, when I heard my son's voice just around the corner by the water cooler. "Once she's gone, we'll finally split the house and cash," Mark whispered, like he was talking about a sale at the hardware store instead of his mother's life. My daughter Lisa let out a quick little laugh, the kind people do when they know they shouldn't be laughing at all. "We'll figure it out," she said. "Eric can draw up some numbers. It's already basically ours. She's not going to live forever." I didn't move. I didn't clear my throat or slam my cup down or announce, "I can hear you, you know." I sat perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the framed print of a sailboat on the wall, and I let their words slide over me like cold water. If you're a woman around my age, you probably know that feeling, that sudden, quiet knowledge that people you love are talking about your life as if you're a line item on a list. The receptionist called my name, "Mrs. Nolan," and the kids stepped back into view, faces carefully neutral, like the whispered conversation hadn't just happened. I stood up slowly, my hip catching for a second, and I remember thinking very clearly that the saddest part wasn't that they wanted the house and the money. It was that they were already talking as if I were gone. I didn't always feel like a ghost in my own life. There was a time, 40 years back, when this all felt like an adventure. Carl and I had bought the little 3-bedroom house on Maple Street when Mark was 6 and Lisa was 4. A modest beige bungalow with a cracked driveway and a maple tree that dropped helicopter seeds all over the lawn every spring. The day we moved in, the real estate agent snapped a picture of the 4 of us in front of the house. Carl in his work boots, me in a denim skirt and a perm I try not to think about, and the kids clutching their stuffed animals. We had that photo printed and put in a simple wooden frame we bought at Kmart, and it has sat on my living room mantel ever since. That frame has collected so much dust and so many years that the corners have rounded a little, but it's been my favorite thing in the house, not because the picture's flattering, it isn't, but because it reminds me who we were when this house was still just beginning to become our home. Every Saturday morning for years, I would dust around that frame before I vacuumed, and the shine on the glass would catch the sunlight from the front window. Back then, whenever I wiped that frame, I'd feel this little flare of pride. Look what we built. Look what we made. Carl's gone now, 5 years this October, which still catches me off guard when I say it out loud. He had a second heart attack that he didn't come back from, and after the funeral, I stayed alone in the house with the maple tree and the humming old refrigerator and the photo frame on the mantel watching over me like a quiet witness. Widowhood is strange. People bring casseroles and tell you to call them if you need anything. But after a few months, life goes back to normal for them. My normal was just quieter. I took my Social Security, the little bit of pension Carl left, and I made it stretch. I clipped coupons and bought store-brand coffee and did without new clothes most years. It wasn't glamorous, but the bills got paid. My children knew that. They also knew every corner of that house like their own hands, because It's where their whole childhood lives. Maybe that's why it took me so long to see the shift. At first, it was little things. Mark and his wife Jenna live across town, and they'd swing by on Sundays to check on me, as he liked to say. And somehow that always ended with me babysitting the kids while they ran errands or handing over $50 just until Friday for a sports fee or a repair. Lisa lives closer, only 10 minutes away, and she works part-time at the dentist's office. She has 2 teenagers who consider my fridge an extension of their own. I'd pack leftovers for them, fold their laundry when it got dropped off in a panic, and say yes to every last-minute, "Mom, could you?" because that's what I'd always done. You might roll your eyes at this now, but back then it felt like my job. Carl used to say, "We're the net, Mary. Kids jump because there's a net." And I took that very seriously. One evening, not long after Carl died, I was standing at my stove basting a chicken for Sunday dinner. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen, and the old analog clock over the range ticked louder in the quiet than it ever had, when the kids were still little and noisy. The way the roasting pan gleamed made me think of another Sunday, 25 years earlier, when I'd burned the chicken because Lisa had a fever, and I was on the phone with the pediatrician. Carl had marched into the smoke-filled kitchen, laughing, windows flung open, kids complaining, and said, "Well, I guess it's grilled cheese instead. One day we'll laugh about the great charred chicken of '97. We did laugh later when the kids were in bed and the kitchen was clean. I remember how he kissed my forehead and told me I was doing great, even if dinner was a disaster. That memory floated up out of nowhere that night, while I basted a perfectly roasted bird for my grown children. And I had this small, uneasy thought. No one tells me I'm doing great anymore. They just expect the chicken. The first real crack showed a year after Carl died, when Mark came over with Jenna and a man I'd never met. "This is Chris from the bank," Mark said, breezy, not meeting my eyes. They all smelled like cold air and car exhaust from outside. "We're just going to sit at the table and go over some options, okay?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel and glanced at my photo frame on the mantel, the past version of us, smiling in front of the house. "Options for what?" I asked. Mark shifted, that same restless shuffle he had as a teenager when he knew he was pushing it. "Just some refinancing stuff. It could really help us, Mom. Our mortgage is killing us, and with your equity—" That was the first time I heard the word equity attached to my home in that tone. Like my life shelter was a resource he could mine. I listened to the man from the bank describe lines of credit and interest rates, talk about leveraging the asset, while Mark squeezed my shoulder and said, "This is such a smart move, Mom." I stared down at the papers he slid across, all those dense paragraphs and signature lines, and something inside me balked. I thought of Carl sitting at that same table years earlier, signing our first mortgage papers, squeezing my hand under the table instead of my shoulder. We'd promised each other that day that we'd pay off that house before we retired. And we had. "I'm sorry, honey," I said finally, my voice softer than I felt. "I'm not comfortable putting the house up for anything. It's all I've got." Mark's face fell, and Jenna's mouth went thin. The bankman shuffled his papers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. After that, Mark still visited, but there was a new edge to his voice whenever money came up. Little comments about how Some parents help their kids with down payments, or some people don't just sit on unused equity. Lisa wasn't much better. When her husband, Eric, got laid off from his engineering job, she asked if they could move in just for a few months while they got back on their feet. I said yes because I remembered the terror of bills piling up, and I didn't want to see my daughter and grandkids out on the street. They ended up staying almost a year. They took over the front room, left dishes in the sink, and changed the Wi-Fi password without telling me. I watched my quiet house fill up with people and noise again. But instead of feeling like the warm chaos of my younger years, it felt like being pushed to the edges of my own life. One Wednesday afternoon during that time, I came home from the grocery store balancing bags on my arms, and I heard Eric's voice from the living room. "Once we're in a better place, I'll talk to your mom about transferring the title," he was saying. I paused in the hall, hidden by the corner. We could at least get our names on it, so we're not starting from nothing when she goes. Lisa didn't even lower her voice. "Yeah, Mark will make a fuss, but Mom promised Carl the kids would get everything, so she'll do it." At the word promised, I almost dropped the bag of milk and cereal, because I remembered that promise differently. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light, buzzing a little, and I brought out the old shoebox where I'd stuffed years of receipts and bank statements. The table smelled faintly of lemon oil from where I'd wiped it earlier, and the hum of the refrigerator kept me company in the dim house. If you've ever been the one who always helps, maybe you've had a night like that yourself, surrounded by little white slips of paper that tell a story no one else is interested in hearing. I started sorting the receipts into 3 piles on the worn tabletop. In one, I put everything that was just the ordinary cost of me living in that house: mortgage payments from long ago, utility bills, property taxes, new roofs and furnaces and water heaters. In the second pile, I placed everything I'd spent directly on the kids since they'd become adults: co-signed car loans, rent help, emergency dentist bills, sports fees for the grandkids, a plane ticket for Mark when he got stuck out of state, a deposit for Lisa when she had to break a lease. The third pile was supposed to be things for me: little treats, a pedicure, a weekend trip with church ladies, hobbies. That last pile grew slowly: a grocery receipt here with a bouquet of flowers circled, a one-time art class I never went back to. Compared to the first 2 pyramids of paper, it looked almost silly. I stared at the table, heart thudding, and it hit me how badly I had tilted my own scales. I had been pouring into my children's lives for decades, and when it came to pouring into my own, I'd barely dribbled. A couple of days later, my granddaughter Megan dropped by. She's Lisa's oldest, 22, and in college, with chipped nail polish and a habit of twirling her hair when she's thinking. She plopped onto the couch, saw the shoebox still on the table, and asked, "What's all this, Nana?" I tried to sweep the papers up, embarrassed, but she came over and picked up a receipt from 6 years ago. $200 for Mark's radiator, she read, eyebrows shooting up. Another one. $300 for our soccer tournament in Chicago. I thought Mom paid for that. She flipped through a few more and then looked at me, really looked at me. "You've covered a lot, huh?" Her voice was softer now. "I help where I can," I said, pulling my cardigan tighter around myself. Megan pulled out a chair and sat. "But who helps you?" she asked. It wasn't said with pity, more like an honest question. She tapped a receipt against the table. "It's like you're a subscription everyone signed up for and forgot to cancel. They just assume you're always going to be there, paying out." Her words stung because they were true. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Nana, you're allowed to have things that are just yours. Grandpa would be so mad if he saw how they talk to you." That night, after Megan left, I stood in front of the mantel and picked up the wooden photo frame. The glass was smudged from tiny fingerprints from years past, and one corner had a little nick where Carl had bumped it once while helping me dust. I wiped it carefully with the hem of my sleeve, and as I held it, another memory washed over me. We were in this same living room maybe 10 years before Carl died. The TV was on some football game, but muted, and we were sitting with an estate planning packet between us. The lawyer had suggested we make a will now that the house was paid off and the kids were adults. I remember tracing the edge of that frame with my finger, nervous. "I just want them to be okay," I'd said. "If something happens to us, they should get the house." Carl had nodded, but he'd turned my face toward his. "Yes, eventually," he said. "But if I go first, Mary, you promise me one thing. You don't let them push you. You keep this house as long as you want it. They get what's left when you're done living in it, not before." I'd laughed it off, told him he was being dramatic, but he held my gaze until I nodded. "Say it," he'd insisted. "I won't let them push me." Back then, the idea seemed ridiculous. Our kids were sweet, still struggling, still calling home for recipes and advice. The idea that they might one day circle the house like an asset hadn't even crossed my mind. Standing there, years later, with the frame warm in my hands, I heard his voice like he was in the room. I whispered into the quiet, "I remember, Carl. I remember." So when the appointment reminder from Attorney Wallace's office showed up in the mail a few weeks before that morning in the waiting room, I took it as a sign. We'd set the appointment months earlier just to review some powers of attorney and beneficiaries, because it was time to organize things, as Wallace had gently put it. But after hearing Eric talk about getting our names on the title and seeing those piles of receipts, I called the office and asked to add something else to the agenda. The receptionist, a kind woman named Tanya, didn't ask for details. "Of course, Mrs. Nolan," she said. "We'll block out a little more time." The day of my private meeting with Wallace, this was before the kids were involved, the sky over our little Michigan town was a dull gray, and the wind cut right through my coat as I walked from the parking lot to his building. The law office smelled like paper, coffee, and the faint citrus of copy toner. Wallace himself was about my age. With thinning hair and reading glasses, he was always pushing up his nose. He'd handled Carl's will, and he'd shaken my hand at the funeral. When I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk, he gave me that professional smile. "So, Mary, what can I do for you today?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of the photo frame and Carl's long-ago words like a hand on my shoulder. "I want to change my will," I said. "Not tweak, change." His eyebrows went up a fraction. "All right," he said, leaning forward. "Talk me through what's on your mind." It took me a while. I'm not someone who likes to talk badly about my children, even when they deserve it. I told him about Mark bringing the bankman over, about Lisa talking casually about when we get the house, about the year they'd lived with me and how invisible I'd felt. I told him about sorting the receipts, about Megan's comment, about overhearing Eric and Lisa discussing transferring the title. I left out the worst words because there's something about saying them out loud that makes them too real. But Wallace is a smart man. He got the picture. When I was finished, he took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose for a moment. "I'm sorry, Mary," he said, and his tone sounded real. "You've been very generous. It's not wrong to say that out loud." I felt my cheeks flush from a mixture of shame and relief. "I don't want to punish them," I said quickly. "They're my kids, but I also don't want them hovering around waiting for me to die just to get their hands on the house. That house is my life. It's my security." Wallace nodded slowly. "You're describing something I see a lot," he said. "Adult children counting resources that aren't theirs yet. What we can do, and remember, this is your decision, not mine, is build a plan that takes care of you first, no matter what, and then distributes whatever is left in a way that matches your values, not just their expectations." He explained options to me in language I could understand. Instead of leaving the house outright to the kids upon my death, we could set up instructions that it be sold when I was gone, with the proceeds divided in a way I chose. We could change the beneficiaries on my small retirement account to include the grandkids instead of just Mark and Lisa, which would put money directly into the next generation's hands. We could list a charity that meant something to me to receive a portion. "Think of it like rearranging the keys to your home," Wallace said. "Right now, your kids think they're the only ones who are going to have keys once you're gone. You're allowed to decide differently." I thought of the wooden photo frame, the house in the background, Lisa on my hip, Mark clutching Carl's leg. It hurt, imagining documents that didn't leave everything to them. It also hurt imagining them fighting over me like a prize. In the end, here's what I decided. After I'm gone, the house is to be sold. 40% of the proceeds will go into a scholarship fund at the local community college for older women going back to school, something I've fantasized about doing but never could afford. Another 40% will be divided equally among my grandchildren, held in trust until they turn 25. The remaining 20% will go to Mark and Lisa, split between them. I changed the beneficiary on my modest life insurance to the same grandchildren, with a small bequest each to Mark and Lisa. Enough that no one could say I'd cut them out in a fit of spite, but not enough for them to plan their futures around it. I appointed Wallace and my niece Cindy as co-executors instead of Mark alone, and we updated my health care and financial powers of attorney so that decisions would be made by Cindy, who has always had a cooler head, instead of the kids who, frankly, see me as both fragile and a resource. Signing those papers felt both terrifying and like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. Wallace slid them into a folder and looked at me over his glasses. "This is your will now," he said. "The old one is revoked. You understand that?" "I do," I said. "I also want them to hear it from someone besides me one day, so they can't say I was confused." Wallace nodded. "We can absolutely arrange a family meeting where I summarize your plan with you present," he said. "To answer questions and make sure everyone is clear, but only if you want that. It's not required." I sat back and thought about Megan's face, about Carl's promise, about how my children had already begun to speak, as if the house was theirs. "Yes," I said quietly. "I want that. Not right away, but soon." That soon turned into the day of the waiting room whispers. I arranged the meeting under the guise of a simple review of my estate plan, something sensible older adults do. I told Mark and Lisa that Wallace recommended we all sit together to go over things so there would be no surprises later. They both agreed, which honestly surprised me, but I suppose they thought it would be a pleasant confirmation of what they already believed, that they'd split the house and the cash. Sitting there that morning, hearing Mark literally say those words, "Once she's gone, we'll finally split the house and cash," was like being slapped with the exact assumption I had feared. I kept my body stone still, but inside, something stood up. Maybe you've had that too, a moment where you realize you're done explaining your value to people who should already know it. When Tanya called my name, I walked through the door into Wallace's office with a steadiness that surprised even me. Wallace had both my old and new wills on his desk in separate folders, though only the new one had legal force. He had explained he liked to keep the old one for reference in case anyone tried to claim I had suddenly changed everything. Lisa and Mark took the chairs on either side of me, and their spouses lined the back wall like a small, unhappy jury. The room was bright from the big window behind Wallace's desk, and the light made every wrinkle in my hand stand out. Wallace smiled professionally. "All right, everyone," he said. "Your mother asked me to explain her estate plan with her here. Before we begin, I want to emphasize this is Mary's plan. She is fully competent, and these decisions are hers to make." I saw Jenna exchange a quick look with Mark at the words "fully competent," and I tucked that away. Wallace slid his hand toward the folder with the older will. I've got the will that Mary and her husband Carl executed back in 2010, and the new will we signed last month, he began. Which would you like me to start with? This was the moment. I could feel all four of the kids, mine and the in-laws, leaning forward in their own ways, wanting to hear what they expected to hear. I thought of Megan's hand around mine at the kitchen table, of Carl, insisting I say out loud that I wouldn't let them push me. I thought of the wooden photo frame sitting on my mantel, the younger me smiling in front of this house, not yet knowing how hard we'd worked to hang on to it. My heart was pounding, but my voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm. "Tom," I said, using Wallace's first name like we did when Carl was still alive, "I'd like you to read the new will instead of the old one." The room seemed to suck in a breath. Lisa frowned. "Wait, new will?" she said. Mark's jaw tightened. Wallace glanced at me for confirmation, and I nodded. He folded his hands over the newer folder. "As Mary wishes," he said. He didn't read every line. That's not how these things work when you're alive and well. Instead, he summarized. "Upon Mary's death," he began, "her primary residence at 218 Maple will be sold. The net proceeds will be distributed as follows: 40% to establish the Mary Nolan Scholarship Fund at Lakeside Community College to support women over 40 returning to school. 40% divided equally among her grandchildren, held in trust until age 25. And the remaining 20% divided equally between her children, Mark and Lisa. You could practically hear a pin drop between each clause. I watched Mark's face go from expectant to confused to something close to bewildered. Lisa's eyes widened and her mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. Jenna made a small noise, like a scoff she tried to swallow. Eric's eyebrows disappeared into his hairline. Wallace went on explaining the smaller bequests, the way my car would be sold, the fact that my modest retirement accounts and life insurance had the grandchildren named as primary beneficiaries. He noted that my niece and he would serve as co-executors, and that my prior 2010 will was revoked in full. When he finished, he looked at me again. "Mary, is there anything you'd like to add?" he asked. I took a breath. There it was, the chance to either backpedal or stand firm. "Just that this is what I want," I said, and my voice only trembled a little. "I love my children. I've helped them in every way I knew how, sometimes more than I could afford. But I also want to help my grandchildren start their lives without the same weight, and I want to do something good for women like me who never got to go to school because they were busy raising kids and paying mortgages. This plan does that, and it makes sure I'm taken care of as long as I'm alive, which is something I've noticed not everyone in this room has been thinking about." As soon as the words left my mouth, the air sizzled. "What is this?" Mark exploded, leaning forward, his hands flat on his knees. "Mom, when did you do this? Why didn't you talk to us?" Lisa's voice came out higher, brittle. "Is this because of something we said? Because this doesn't feel like you. This feels extreme." Jenna stepped in, her tone cold. "It's irresponsible, that's what it is. Who put this idea in her head? People don't just wake up and decide to give their house to strangers at some college." Wallace cleared his throat. "If I may," he said carefully, "we're not discussing strangers. We're discussing a scholarship in Mary's name and her grandchildren, and Mary initiated this change herself." Lisa turned to me, eyes shining with angry tears. "We've given you everything, Mom," she said. "We moved in to keep you company. We check on you. I couldn't help it. I laughed just once, a short, disbelieving sound. "You moved in because you needed a place to live without paying rent," I said, not loud but firm. "You check on me when it works for your schedules, and in between you talk at banks and in my living room about putting your names on my title like I'm a timeshare you're waiting to inherit." Mark flushed. "So this is punishment then?" he snapped. "Because we were being practical?" I looked at him, really looked, and what I saw was a 50-year-old man who was still convinced that one day his parents' work would rescue him from his own choices. "No," I said quietly. "This is me finally taking myself into account. You have both had decades of my help. The scholarship is for women who never got that kind of help. The trust is so your kids don't have to beg their grandparents to co-sign loans. You and Lisa will still get something, but my home is not some prize you divvy up in whispers like I'm already buried." Lisa's cheeks reddened, and she glanced involuntarily at Wallace, who was looking down as if he hadn't heard. "You heard that?" she stammered. I met her eyes. I was sitting 15 feet away. I heard every word. Maybe you've sat in a room like that too, dear listener, with your heart pounding and your hand suddenly steady, saying things you never thought you'd say out loud. It's scary. It's also strangely freeing. The conversation that followed was messy and loud. Mark insisted I was being manipulated, that someone must have told me horror stories about ungrateful children. Lisa tried the softer approach, touching my arm and saying she was concerned that I wasn't thinking clearly about my own future. Jenna brought up what people at church would think when they found out my money went to strangers, not family. Eric tried to play peacemaker, suggesting we revisit these decisions in a year when emotions had cooled. Through it all, Wallace sat like a stone, only interjecting to clarify that I was of sound mind, that the documents were valid, and that any challenge to them would be both difficult and public. At one point, Mark turned to Wallace, jabbing a finger in his direction. "Aren't lawyers supposed to prevent families from being torn apart? You should have told us she was doing something this crazy." Wallace's jaw tightened. "My duty is to my client, Mark," he said. "Your mother is my client. She has the right to confidentially plan her estate. It is not my role to get your approval." That shut him up for at least a full minute. Eventually, there was nothing more to yell that hadn't been said already. Wallace slid the folder toward me. "Mary, as we discussed earlier, I'll keep the original here and you'll take this copy home," he said. "If you wish to make changes in the future, that's always your option. But as of now, this is your binding plan." I tucked the folder into my bag, my fingers brushing the worn strap that Carl used to tease me about replacing. And in that moment, it felt like the balance in the room tilted just a few degrees away from everyone else and back toward me. The ride home was quiet. Mark and Jenna had driven separately, as had Lisa and Eric, so I was alone in my old Buick. The sky had gone from gray to a pale watery blue, and the bare branches of the trees along Maple Street made a lace pattern against it. When I stepped into my living room, the first thing I saw was the wooden photo frame on the mantel. I set my purse down, took the frame in both hands, and carried it to the sofa. Sitting there with that old picture in my lap, I felt both heartbreak and a strange lightness. "We did our best, didn't we?" I murmured to the Carl in the photo. "We got them this far. The rest is up to them now." The house was so quiet I could hear the tick of the wall clock and, faintly, the distant sound of a lawn-mower somewhere down the block. I thought about how, in all those years of wiping that frame, I'd been polishing everyone else's future while letting mine gather dust. The storm started that evening, as storms do these days, through screens first. My phone lit up with texts. "Mark, I can't believe you embarrassed us like that." Lisa, "Mom, we need to talk. This isn't fair." Megan, bless her heart. "Nana, I heard there was drama. Are you okay? I'm proud of you. BDW." A few hours later, my ringtone, the little chime I'd picked because it reminded me of the bell we used to have on our front door, kept sounding as Mark called, then Lisa, then Mark again. I set the phone face down on the coffee table next to the photo frame and took my time finishing my cup of tea. Maybe you know that quiet rebellion too, choosing not to jump at every demand the second it arrives. When I finally answered, I started with Lisa. "Mom," she began without preamble, "I've been talking to Eric and Mark, and we really think you need to reconsider what you did today. It's going to cause so many problems." I leaned back against the sofa, feeling the wood of the frame solid against my palm. "Problems for who?" I asked. There was a pause on her end. "For everyone," she said, but her voice faltered. "For us. For the family. People are going to ask why you did this. They're going to think we treated you badly." I could hear dishes clinking in the background at her house, the familiar chaos of her kitchen. A memory bubbled up, uninvited. Years ago, when Lisa was 9, she came home from school in tears because mean girls had laughed at her glasses. I'd sat her at this same table, pushed her bangs back, and told her that people's opinions came and went like weather. Why do you care what they think? I'd asked. The people who matter know who you are. Now she was the one worried about what people would say, not about how I felt. If anyone asks, I said slowly, you can tell them the truth, that you have a mother who decided to help her grandchildren and other women besides her own children. If that makes you look bad, that's not my doing. Lisa sniffed. How are we supposed to get ahead, Mom? She asked. Our whole generation got screwed. Prices are insane, wages are low. We were counting on something when you were gone. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I understand the struggle. I do. I lived paycheck to paycheck for years. I know it's hard, I said. I remember grocery lists where I had to choose between peanut butter and toilet paper. But your inheritance was never owed to you. It was a hope you built in your head. I can love you without making my entire life a savings account for your future. She made a frustrated noise. You're being stubborn, she said. You're letting other people influence you. That lawyer, Megan, whoever, you've never talked like this before. Maybe that's the problem, I replied. Maybe I should have talked like this years ago. Mark's call later that night was hotter, less coated in concern. So, this is it? He demanded. You're giving away the house we grew up in, to strangers. Do you have any idea how that feels? The anger in his voice pricked my own temper, something I hadn't let rise in years. I'm not giving it away to strangers, I said. I'm making sure it turns into something good when I no longer need it. For your children, for other women. He scoffed. Other women. Great. So, your own son gets a pat on the head and what, 10%? You'll get enough to do something meaningful if you're careful, I answered. But not enough to coast. That's not my job, Mark. It never was. Dad would never have done this, he shot back. That one hurt, but it also cleared something up for me. Your father trusted me with this house, I said firmly. He told me not to let you push me, and that is exactly what I am finally not doing. If he were here, he might make different choices, or he might not. We'll never know. But he's not here. I am, and I won't be managed like an asset anymore. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, boyish. So that's it, he said. We're just not important. And my heart broke a little because that is not what I wanted him to feel. You are important to me, I said. Not because of what I leave you, but because you're my son. This doesn't change that. But I can't keep proving it with dollar signs. I've been proving it with dinners and rides and emergency checks for 30 years. It's time you believe me or you don't, without looking at my house as evidence. The days after that were rough. The kids pulled back. Lisa didn't drop by as often. Mark skipped his Sunday calls for a while. Family group chats went quieter, or I saw conversations happening without me, because Megan would mention something I hadn't heard about. It stung. Of course it did. Loneliness feels different when it's not just about someone dying, but about people choosing distance because you stopped giving them what they wanted. I had evenings where I sat in my recliner, the TV on low, and thought, maybe I went too far. Maybe I should have just quietly changed a few numbers instead of making it all so clear. But then I'd glance at the mantel and see that wooden photo frame, and I'd remember the piles of receipts, the whispers in law offices, the feeling of being talked over in my own kitchen. I'd remember Carl's hand squeezing mine and Megan's fingers twined with mine across the table. And I'd remind myself that peace doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with a smaller circle and a quieter phone. Not everyone pulled away. Megan came over that next weekend with a bag of takeout Thai food and 2 cans of ginger ale. She walked in like she always had, calling, "Nana, it's just me," in that sing-song voice that made my shoulders drop an inch. We sat on the couch, the photo frame between us on the coffee table like a tiny audience. "Mom is steaming," she said bluntly, around a mouthful of noodles. "She keeps saying Grandma's been radicalized. I told her you just finally put yourself on the list." I chuckled, slurping my own noodles. "That's dramatic," I said. Megan shrugged. "Millennials and Gen Z don't have a monopoly on deciding our own boundaries," she said. "You're just finally doing it. Late adopter." She nudged my knee with hers. "I'm proud of you, Nana. Seriously. Mom and Uncle Mark, they love you. I know they do. But they've also gotten used to thinking of your house as their safety net. You took that away, and they're freaking the hell out. That's on them." Her casual use of language made me wince a little, but it also made me smile. She reached for the photo frame and studied it. "You look so young here," she said, "and exhausted and happy. It's like you were building a future for everyone." She set it back down carefully. "You're allowed to build a future for yourself, even now. If you're listening to this and you have a granddaughter or a younger friend, maybe you know that strange flip when they become the one giving you the lecture you used to give them. It's humbling. It's also beautiful. Nights got easier after that. Less lying awake, rehearsing arguments in my head, more thinking about what I wanted this next chapter of my life to feel like. With the kids not dropping by every other day with errands and needs, my schedule opened up in ways I hadn't expected. I started walking more, just around the block at first, then down to the park where there's a bench that looks out over a small pond. The first time I sat there alone, watching ducks skid into the water, I felt almost guilty, like I should check my phone, see who needed me. Then I remembered, for once, no one had a right to. I also found myself drawn to the idea of the scholarship I'd set up. Wallace had put me in touch with the development office at Lakeside, and a woman named Jean called to talk through how it would work. "We can actually get the paperwork started now," she said. "The fund will be activated when the estate is settled someday, but we can define the criteria in your own words while you're here. That way, the women who get it will know what you wanted for them." So one rainy afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, and wrote that I wanted the scholarships to go to women over 40 who had spent years caring for others and were finally taking a class for themselves. Maybe nursing, maybe accounting, maybe art, whatever would make them feel alive. As I wrote, the rain pattered against the window, and the smell of my old lemon oil cleaner lingered in the air. A memory rose up, sharp and unexpected. Me at 38, standing in the same kitchen, holding a community college brochure I'd picked up at the library. It had a picture of a woman my age at a computer, and I'd thought, maybe I could learn something new. Then Mark had run in bleeding from a scraped knee, Lisa behind him crying because her bike tire was flat, and by the time everyone was calmed down, the brochure had been used to mop up spilled juice. Life had taken over. I'd never registered. Writing those scholarship criteria felt like sending a little apology to that younger version of myself. "I couldn't do it then," I murmured, "but someone else will." A few weeks later, Lisa knocked on my door one afternoon. Not the quick, casual knock of someone letting themselves in, but a polite two-tap knock that told me this was not a usual visit. I opened the door to find her standing there with a container of soup in her hands, her hair pulled back, no makeup on. She looked tired. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Can I come in?" I stepped back and let her. The soup smelled like chicken and thyme, and the scent tugged at another old memory. Lisa at 12, hovering in the kitchen as I taught her how to skim fat off broth, her eyes bright with interest. I had thought, maybe she'll love cooking like I do. She'd gotten busy with friends and soccer and lost interest. The soup container now felt like a small, awkward echo of that time. We sat at the table, the photo frame just visible over Lisa's shoulder on the mantel. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly. "I just needed to talk to you without everyone else." She twisted the lid of the soup container, hands restless. "Things have been weird," she added unnecessarily. "Yes," I said. "They have." She blew out a breath. "I'm still upset," she admitted. I won't lie. I grew up thinking the house would be, I don't know, this anchor for us. Like no matter what happened, there'd always be this place. The idea that it's going to be sold to pay for strangers' tuition. She caught herself. "Not strangers. I know, but it feels like strangers." I listened, stirring my own tea. "It's okay that you're upset," I said. "Feelings don't have to match what we want for them to be real, but this is still what I'm doing." She nodded, eyes shining. "I figured you'd say that," she said, with a little sad smile. "Eric thinks you're making a point, a big dramatic one." "He's not entirely wrong," I admitted. "Sometimes you have to draw the line in a way people can't ignore." Lisa looked down at her hands. "Were we really that bad?" she asked in a small voice. "I mean, I know we've asked for help, but that's what families do. You always said that." I met her eyes. "Yes," I said, "families help, and I'm not sorry for the help I gave. I am sorry I didn't speak up sooner when it turned from help into expectation. When Mom will figure it out became the first solution instead of the last. You may not have meant to do that, but that's how it felt." She nodded slowly, tears spilling over. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Honestly, I didn't. I just panicked. And you were always there. It didn't occur to me that one day you might not be able to be." That admission softened something in me. We ended that conversation with more understanding than we started it with, even if we still didn't agree on everything. Lisa left the soup, and we hugged longer than we had in months. Mark took longer. He stayed distant, his texts brief, if he replied at all. I missed him. I missed the version of him who used to call me at 19 from his college dorm, panicked about laundry, laughing in that carefree way. But I also knew I couldn't fix this by offering more money or rewriting my will again to appease him. So I let time do what it does, and I focused on the small, tangible joys that had started blossoming in the quieter space my boundaries had created. I signed up for a painting class at the community center, of all things, just a 6-week course, Thursday afternoons, watercolors for beginners. I almost didn't go, convinced I'd be the oldest woman there, but it turned out the room was full of people my age and older, all of us in aprons, squinting at fruits and teacups. The first time I swirled a brush through a pool of blue paint and watched it bloom on the paper, I felt a giddy little spark. Not because the painting was good, it wasn't, but because I was doing something with my two hands that wasn't cooking or cleaning or signing checks. On the days between classes, I'd sit at my kitchen table with my paints, the photo frame propped nearby, and I'd dab at little sketches of the house, the maple tree, the frame itself. One afternoon, I realized I'd been painting for 2 hours without checking my phone once. It startled me, and then it made me smile. Months went by. The will sat secure and quiet in Wallace's office, and a copy rested in the back of my dresser drawer behind my sweaters. I took it out once in a while just to remind myself that it was real, that I hadn't imagined the shift. Every time I'd end up sitting on the edge of my bed, the paper smooth under my fingers, and I'd feel that same steadying weight in my chest. Not triumph, not spite, just a calm sense that I had finally written my own name into the story of my life. One Sunday, maybe 6 months after the big meeting, Mark showed up at my door. No warning, just his truck in the drive and his knock on the frame. When I opened the door, he stood there with his hands in his jeans pockets, looking awkward. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Got a minute?" My heart did a little jump. "Of course," I said. We sat in the living room, the photo frame directly across from us on the mantel. He stared at it for a moment before speaking. "I drove past Lakeside the other day," he said. "Had a service call out that way. I saw a sign about some scholarship gala they're planning. Said your name." I blinked. Jean must have moved quickly. I hadn't known they'd announced anything yet. "Oh," I said, "I didn't realize they'd put it on the sign." He shrugged. "It said, 'Future home of the Mary Nolan Scholarship Fund,'" he muttered. "Kinda weird seeing my mom's name on a billboard." I chuckled softly. "I'm not dead yet," I said. "They're just getting ready." He snorted. "Guess you always did like to be early." He rubbed his hands together. "Look, Mom, I've been angry. You know that." "I do," I said. "You had some choice words on the phone." A ghost of a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, well, I'm not proud of all of them," he admitted. "The thing is, work's been slow. We had a big job fall through, and for a minute there, I caught myself thinking, well, at least when Mom goes, I'll get the house money." He looked over at me, shame raw in his eyes, and I hated myself for it. That's not who I want to be, but it's who I was becoming. I swallowed hard. "That's part of why I did what I did," I said. "I didn't like who you were becoming either. I didn't want my own son to be sitting around waiting for me to die so he could patch holes in his life with what your father and I built." He nodded, throat working. "I know," he said. "I get it more now. Doesn't mean I like it, but I get it." He glanced at the mantel again. "I keep thinking about how you and Dad paid that place off, working 2 jobs, you making all our clothes for years, clipping coupons, all of it. We haven't done that. We've just sort of, I don't know, floated, expecting something to save us. If you've ever heard your grown child say something like that, you know it's both painful and hopeful at the same time." "Floating gets you tired," I said gently. "Planting your feet is harder at first, but it's steadier." He laughed softly. "Well, it's time I planted mine," he said. "Got an offer to pick up some weekend jobs. Not glamorous, but it's a start. And I'm going to stop counting on your house. I don't want to see you as a investment." The fact that he had to reach for that word told me he'd used worse ones in his head. "Thank you for saying that," I said, my voice thick. "It means a lot." Before he left, he stood in front of the mantel and picked up the wooden photo frame. He turned it over, saw the date scrawled on the back in my handwriting. "Move-in day, May 1983. "I remember this," he said. "I was mad because you made me put on a clean shirt for the picture When I wanted to keep playing with the neighbor kids, I laughed. You hated that shirt. He smiled, setting the frame back carefully. I didn't hate the house, though, he said. I loved this house. Still do. But I think I'd rather remember it as our home than as some number I'm going to get one day. That, right there, felt like more justice than any legal paper could give me. Life didn't become a fairy tale after that. There are still days when I feel the ache of old patterns, when I hear a story about someone leaving their children a paid-off house and wonder if I've been too harsh. There are other days when I sit in my painted kitchen, my watercolors drying on the table, and I feel nothing but relief. The relationships with my kids are still a work in progress. Lisa sometimes slips and says things like, "When you go, we'll have to figure out where to put the new sofa," then catches herself and winces. Mark still complains about money more than I'd like, but there's an unspoken understanding now that my home, while I'm in it, is mine, that my resources are not their right, and that what happens after I'm gone is my legacy to shape, not their entitlement to pre-spend. The wooden photo frame still sits on my mantel, but a few months ago I did something I never thought I would. I changed the picture inside it. The original photo is safely tucked into an album now, preserved. In its place, I slid in a new picture Megan took last fall. In it, I'm standing on the front porch of the house, a blanket around my shoulders, hot mug in my hands, the maple tree blazing red behind me. The grandkids are on the steps below, laughing at something one of them said. There's a little more gray in my hair, a few more lines on my face, but my eyes look steady. When I dust around that frame now, I see not just the young woman who moved in full of hope, but the older woman who decided that her story didn't end when her husband died or when her children grew up. It includes this chapter, too, where she learned words like no and enough, and this is what I choose, without apologizing. If you've stayed with me all this way, thank you for keeping me company. Maybe you've heard echoes of your own life in mine, of kids who count things that aren't theirs yet, of a house that feels more like a finish line to them than a home to you, of a heart that's tired from being everyone's safety net. Wherever you are listening from, whether it's a little apartment in Toronto, a farmhouse in Alberta, a suburban street in Brisbane, or a condo in Phoenix, I'd really love to know. Come tell me in the comments where you're watching from so we can remind each other that we're not going through these things alone. If stories like this make you feel seen and you'd like to help me keep sharing them, there's a super thanks button here on YouTube that lets you support the channel in a small but very meaningful way. It means more than you can imagine when I see those little hearts pop up. On your screen you should see a couple more of my life stories that might speak to you if you want to stay here with me a little bit longer today. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next time we sit down together for another story. Until then, please take gentle care of yourselves. You are allowed to matter in your own life too.